We're back with the people of Israel in the Old Testament today. And so as we've been journeying through kind of the big stories of the Old Testament these past few months, and I really kind of debated on what to preach today as we're kind of nearing the end of the series, because you could take years in a series like this. I mean, they're all big stories in a sense, right? And so, but the key objective, what we're trying to do with this series is to show kind of God's big movement in the Old Testament and to really show that Jesus is the one true hero of the entire Bible, even the Old Testament. And so, as y'all know, I have 3 kids, right? And we're not really a puzzle family, because like you see the picture on the box and then you got to do all this work to see the picture again. That doesn't make sense to me, okay? But we have done some in the past, right? And I get frustrated because I'm ready, and one of my former bosses used to say that Rome wasn't built in a day because I wasn't invited. So I'm ready to just kind of get to it, but we'll take our time. And inevitably, every time we do a puzzle, there seems like there's extra pieces, even at this part. And so, like, how in the world is this middle piece? There's no way it fits into the rest. And then, you keep working and all of a sudden, the puzzle's finished and it all makes sense. And it seem like the smaller pieces don't connect to the whole for a little while, but then as it all comes together, you realize that every piece has its place. And so the stories of the Old Testament are not isolated accounts that highlight the moral efforts of a few really good people. Okay, actually, it's a collection of stories of jacked up people who all point to Jesus, and there's this real beauty, us having a New Testament understanding and then reading and studying the Old Testament. Those pictures that are like, it's a compilation of pictures, but then it sums into a bigger picture. Okay, so like it's called a photographic mosaic, okay? That's not a real picture of Jesus. The internet made this for me this past week, okay? But the New Testament enables us to look at the thousands of parts of the Old Testament in such a way that we see Jesus emerge from it. So we pick up these crumbs along the way to arrive at Golgotha, and we see that Jesus has been there the whole time. I distinctly remember when I started coming across authors and preachers who showed that the Old Testament was all about Jesus. And it's like I'd never read the Bible before. All of a sudden, I saw Jesus everywhere, that Jesus is the new and better Adam who passed the test in the garden. That Jesus is the true and better Moses who stands in the gap between the people and the Lord and who mediates the new covenant. That Jesus is the true and better Daniel, having been lowered into the den of death and emerged victorious by his God. Or how we looked at last week, how there was our unconquerable slavery behind us and the vast ocean between us and the promised land. But then Jesus was the way. He opened the waters and he was the way for us, taking us out of slavery and into the ultimate promised land. He's everywhere in this book. It's amazing. So go ahead and turn to Numbers chapter 13. That's right, your favorite book of the Bible, Numbers, okay, chapter 13. So, okay, if this is your first Sunday, let me give you a quick summary up until this point of the Old Testament and this entire series. So, the journey of God's people, the people of Israel, God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, okay? And then God tested Abraham by telling him to take his son Isaac up the mountain of sacrifice. And at the last minute, God did not have Abraham sacrifice his son, because one day God would sacrifice his son in our place. And then Abraham's great-grandson Joseph, remember, was sold by his brothers, and all of a sudden he ended up in Egypt. But he was a great businessman, Joseph was, who ended up as almost like the VP or like the Secretary of State of Egypt in this foreign land. And so then his family back in the people of Israel, they fell victim to a famine that was regional-wide. So they all come, and Joseph takes care of them. They come to Egypt. Long story short, they then become enslaved in Egypt. The people of God become enslaved in Egypt, the superpower of the day. And then God rescues them out 400 years later out of Egypt and then out of slavery. And then after they are out of there, they're hunted down. And then God parts the Red Sea. They cross on dry land. They're free. And now they're on their journey to the promised land. That's what we've seen so far. And, now fast forward 38, 39 years, and we arrive to Numbers chapter 13, and they're still in the desert. Okay, it's been quite a while. They're still in the desert. And so Numbers tells us the story of Israel's journey from Mount Sinai, where we get the 10 Commandments, to the edges, to the borders of the promised land, giving us about 40 years again of Israel's history. So the bulk of this book gives us the summary of those 40 years. And you can read it all later, and I really highly encourage you to, especially with all that we've been reading and studying. So far, okay, when we looked at the people of Israel getting out of Egypt and across the Red Sea, we really just kind of saw mile 1 of the marathon, okay? And now they've been in the desert for almost 39 years, and they've just been going, eating the same thing every day, sleeping in tents, and, not really sure when this period is going to end, and they're trying to get to the promised land. And it's interesting, right, that God delivered them out of slavery and into the desert. I've been there. So the thing is, it only took a couple of weeks, right, for God to get them out of slavery, but it took a few decades for God to get the slavery out of them. So look at Numbers chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. The Lord, again, spoke to Moses, saying, okay, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. Not I might give, not I'm thinking about giving if y'all do the work, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe, I want you to, of their fathers, you shall send a man, every one of them a chief among them. Okay, the grass withers, the flowers fade, but the word of our God will stand forever. Let me tell you what's going on. So, again, a lot has happened before this. They're headed to the promised land, but in between where they are and where they want to be, the promised land is the country of Canaan, the land of Canaan. And so, Canaan is in between where they are, where they want to go. And they can't just walk through, right? There's probably a couple million people of Israel at this point. And so it would be, if 1 million or 2 Americans need to go through Afghanistan, we can't just walk through. Like, I'm personally cool with Afghanistan, but if a couple million Americans walk through Afghanistan, they might get threatened and they might pop off, right? And so instead of just traipsing through Canaan with a couple of million people, Israel sends in some spies into Canaan to kind of check out what's going on. So Moses starts MI6, okay, he starts the CIA, and he gives these instructions in verses 17 to 20. So Moses sent the spies to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, all right, now go up into the Negeb and go up into the hill country and see what the land is. So basically get to a high point, look down, and kind of get the lay of the land. And I want you to see whether the people who dwell in it are strong or if they're weak, whether there are few of them or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities they dwell in are in camps or if they have strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in the land or not. Hey, be of good courage. You can do it, guys. And bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Okay. So you see the order, you see the plan. So let me summarize the next few verses for you. The story develops in the next few verses, and so Israel spies went in, they got the lay of the land, they had their earpieces in, they went through the market they're all incognito to kind of see what really is going on here. And they grabbed the grapes that the boss man asked for, okay, and it's a major score. And so you can actually read it later. They also got some pomegranates and figs, okay? So imagine you've eaten white bread for 38 years, and then some guys bring back grapes and pomegranates and figs. These guys are getting a promotion, okay? It's a major deal. All right, so the spies return to camp, and they bring their report to the people, to the nation of Israel. And so, again, the spies return. They're like, yeah, all right, Pastor Moses, it's cool, right? Like, it's the nice views, nice breeze. The grapes are legit. Here's the thing, though. Their army's no joke, okay? Moses, we saw them up close and personal. They all do CrossFit. They're huge. It's really intimidating, right? That's my translation of the next few verses. So, which they were, right? These people would later produce Goliath, okay? So they're bad dudes. So, but the thing is, they got wrong what we get wrong all the time, right? So they're calculating and they're sizing up flesh and bones, but they're forgetting the supernatural. Matched up, man to man, weapon to weapon, the Israelites don't stand a chance, but that's not the matchup. I'm preaching to myself today. That's not the matchup. God versus an army. What's the big deal? He's God. Jesus versus Tiger Woods in his prime. Jesus shoots an 18. It's not even a contest. God versus MJ and LeBron. 1-on-2. And no matter who you have there, obviously, MJ's 1, LeBron is 2. We can debate it later, okay? But whoever you have at 1 and 2, God, 1-on-2. No problem. He's going to take him out. And so the spies are sizing themselves up against this amazing army with dudes who do CrossFit, and the spies are expecting to lose. But what crucial fact are they missing? They're God's people. And this is God's battle. They forgot again that the battle belongs to the Lord. The Old Testament is such a mirror on our lives. That's part of the purpose of it, that we see ourselves spiritually in what they are experiencing. In the first service, My girl Darlene Taylor was down here worshiping, first time back in a couple of months because she's been battling cancer, been going through chemo, had some surgeries. And so her husband, a couple of years ago, died of cancer. And her son is currently doing chemotherapy. He has cancer as well. And she was in the row behind me singing, "Shout to the Lord. All the earth let him sing." She was raising her hand because no matter what happens, she belongs to God. This isn't her battle, it's God's battle. And that's what the Israelites were missing. They thought that victory was getting a nice house and good food in the promised land, right? They had made that really good thing into the ultimate thing. So in our journey to find hope, we gotta nail down exactly what we're trying to find hope in, right? And it can't be in anything that this world offers. Y'all, I have the best news for you today. The victory's already been won. It's already a ball game. Sin has been defeated. The gates of hell will not prevail. So what if the worst happens? Really, so what? If God is for me, who can be against me? God, I can't pay my mortgage, I'm sick. I don't know which way to go. We size up the obstacles in our lives against our strength, but we should be comparing and sizing up our obstacles to God's strength. Don't compare your problems to your power, okay? Compare them to the power of the Almighty God. You think He can't get you a new job? You think He can't solve the problem in your life? Of course He can. Maybe He's trying to make a new you, and that often happens in the desert. Good news, bad news there. So, okay, look back at the story. So the spies come back to the camp. They give their report to the people of Israel that Canaan's army is strong, that this is a strong land that they're trying to go into. Military forces are strong. Look at the people's response in Numbers 14, 1-4. So they give the report. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people of Israel wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to him, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness." I think I pastored that church one time. Verse 3, "Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword now? Our wives and our kids will become prey to these people. Would it not be better? Hey, let's just go back to Egypt." And they said to one another, "Hey, let's choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Can you believe this? God delivered these people, our spiritual ancestors, over and over, sent plagues, guided them, all of these amazing, only God could do it things. Then they face a trial and all seems lost. So yes, having grapes and all these things is amazing. But for 39 years, God had been dropping manna from the sky. They had seen God, seen Moses hit a rock and water came out. They had seen all these amazing things day after day. So they form a pastor search committee for someone to lead them back across 38 years of desert, back into slavery. All of a sudden, they began to see themselves as grasshoppers to be stepped on and not God's chosen people. Okay, so verse 1 says they raised a loud cry. They just wailed, and this is a dramatic word in the text. It's not just like they shed one tear. They sobbed and screamed in terror, really. So what they say in verse 2, again, we just read it, but it amazes me. They go, "Man, let's just go back. We should have just died back in Egypt instead of coming all the way out here now to die out here." And it's hard to believe that this is what they're saying. And y'all remember a couple of weeks ago in Exodus chapter 14, they said almost this exact same thing. And so what they're doing, and we do it too, they keep romanticizing their slavery. They keep, "Oh man, those were the days. Oh, the party days. Oh, those were awesome." No, they really weren't. Oh, it really wasn't. Egypt was terrible. They set taskmasters over them. Their kids worked 18-hour days, 365 days a year. It really wasn't that great. What are y'all talking? So a couple of chapters earlier, Numbers 11, they say, "We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt. They cost nothing because you didn't have money because you were slaves. Oh, the free fish, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there's nothing at all but this old manna to look at every morning that God drops from the sky for free." Again, this is a mirror. Why is it the moment we face opposition, we want to run back to the past? The moment We hit a brick wall, or it seems like a brick wall. We want to run back to the enslavement of our past. Here's what happened. They placed their hope in the promised land instead of placing their hope in God. Sin's tricky, man, okay? Where have you placed your hope today? It's their hearts. They have the information. They've seen the pillar of fire and all these miracles that God did. We have the information. It comes down to faith. Will you trust Jesus or will you trust in yourself? Will you trust Jesus or in your bank account and your education and your degrees? Will you trust Jesus or will you trust in that person's approval? Where is your hope? What is the source of your peace? In what or in whom do you seek fulfillment? Where are you really looking for happiness? Again, God promised them, I'm going to take you to the promised land. They see Canaan with the big army and all is lost. They freak out. What would need to happen in your life to have this sort of reaction? Right? What would you need to lose? What would you need to face for this kind of emotion to come out of you? You know, the scripture says, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So think about it. What are your most uncontrollable emotions? Watch the way you react when you lose money or when you make money. Watch the way that it feels if you don't get the likes that you wanted from the post, or watch the way it feels when you do get the views you wanted, right? So, you know, why does it feel so good or so bad in those moments? Watch how it feels when you get that person's approval or when you don't, right? Watch how it feels. Watch your reaction after a political election, both, you know, either win or lose. Look for your idols at the bottom of your most painful emotions, especially emotions that never seem to lift, right? Or those that drive you to do things that you know are wrong. Really pay attention to that. An idol, of course, is whatever claims your loyalty that belongs to God. Whatever loyalty that you can give to God, if it goes somewhere else, that is oftentimes, or it is an idol. Martin Luther said it this way: whatever your heart clings to and relies upon, that's really your God. If you're angry, stop and ask, is there something too important here for me? Something that I must have at all costs? That's the same thing when you feel deep sadness or guilt or fear. Is there something here too important to me that I gotta have at all costs? If you're overworking, you're driving yourself into the ground by working all the time, stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is there something I have to have here that I think the money's gonna give me or the feeling of achievement is going to give to me? You know, you might have the reputation for being the nicest person in the world because the operating principle of your heart is to have the reputation for being the nicest person in the world. Okay, so doing the cookie drive so you can bless other people, that's great, but doing the cookie drive so that you could feel good about being good, that's quite another matter of the heart. David Paulson writes it this way: has something or someone besides Jesus Christ taken title to your heart's functional trust, preoccupation, loyalty, service, fear, and or delight? To what or who do you look for life-sustaining security, stability, and acceptance? What do you really want and expect this week, this year? What would actually make you happy? What would make you an acceptable person in your eyes and others' eyes, in your view? Where do you really look for power and success? So these questions are similar ones. Tease out in what ways we serve God or idols and in what ways we look to Christ for salvation. And again, it's complicated, so it's not an all or nothing deal, okay? This is what idols look like. So instead of hoping in God, you hope in something less, your future success, money, all these things, or even we put our hope in good things, turning them to ultimate things. A spouse, you know, your calling in life. Ministry is a great calling, but it can't be my God. It'll ruin me, right? So the people of Israel, they idolized the promised land over God himself. And so idols cannot simply be removed. Okay, they got to be replaced. And so if you just uproot your idols and kind of leave it there, well, then they're going to grow again. So they got to be replaced. And I appreciate how in touch with our feelings we get to be these days. I think that's a great thing. But that's awesome. But if you just dig into your emotions but don't commit to change your loves, nothing changes. You don't change by blaming. You change by changing. So by uprooting your sin and then replacing your habits and replacing those desires with more of Jesus, and by setting your affections on him, by reading his word and praying and reading good books about him and being in your city group and really talking and listening, all these sorts of things, by committing in worship. And so, okay, let's keep reading the story. Remember, the Israelites have the God of the universe, pretty good source of strength, promising deliverance, and they discover the Canaanites have a strong army, and they want to go back to Egypt. Look at verses 6 to 9 of chapter 14. So in this same meeting, so they're all wailing and they're all, freaking out and crying and screaming. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, they had been on the spying mission. They had spied out the land. They tore their clothes, okay, because this is a symbol of like lament. They're lamenting what the people of Israel, how they responded to their report. Verse 7, and these two men said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out it's awesome. It's an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into the land. He'll give us the promised land, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us, like the Eagles for the Cowboys today. Amen. Their protection, the protection of the people of Canaan, is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Don't fear them, right? So they're crying. They're all just losing it. You see what they're doing. And then Joshua and Caleb stand up and they're like, hey, hang on. Yes, okay. They have a strong army. The grapes are nice, okay, no doubt, of course. But y'all have forgotten God is on our side. We are God's people. And if God's going to do it, then God's going to do it. Joshua and Caleb believed in God's power. They saw God defeat Pharaoh and his armies, and they know God can do it again. And they're like, if God can destroy those armies, he can do this. They say in verse 9, what y'all need to do is stop rebelling against the Lord. That's a pretty dramatic, word. And so the application for the people of Israel was not stop saying Egypt was awesome, but rather to get under what they're believing. Did they really believe that God was powerful enough to defeat this other army? No. Obviously, they didn't. So then we get to, what do you believe? God has proven himself to you. We have all these things to shout out that we're grateful for earlier in the worship set. That's awesome. So then what about next time? So what do your angers and fears show that you believe? Right? So what are you trying to control that you really should leave to God's control? And I'm not asking whether or not you have idols. You definitely do. Every single one of us, okay? They're hidden. The question is, what do we do about them, right? How can we become increasingly clear-sighted rather than remaining under their power? Part of our journey in life is that God is preparing us for heaven, okay? Of Eugene Peterson, there were some men that went. Eugene Peterson was this great theologian, okay? And, most of his work was basically about Christ-likeness, how to grow in Christ-likeness. And there's a story of some great pastors that went to be with him just a couple of weeks before he died. And they said it was like his transition to heaven would barely be felt. That he had so emptied himself and so given his idols to God and so tried to become like Christ that his transition to heaven was going to be no transition at all. And so that's what God is trying to do in our lives, to free us. We're going to go in Galatians in the spring. Y'all, it's for freedom that you've been set free. He's not trying to be a cosmic killjoy so that you can't do anything fun, okay? He's trying to free you from these things of the world that are not good for you. So that's where the work really begins. How can we become clear-sighted? How can we discern our idols? How can we step into this freedom that Jesus is offering us today? Tim Keller, he gives 4 ways of identifying idols in our hearts. And if we're going to do the hard work of discipleship, this is really where the rubber meets the road, okay? So these 4 areas. So one way to discern your idols is to watch your imagination, to notice and to think about what you imagine, okay? So one way, this is how we kind of dig into our deepest longing. So someone said, your religion is what you do when you're alone. Okay, so in other words, maybe the true God of your heart is where your thoughts effortlessly go when nothing else is demanding your attention. All right, so what do you find yourself daydreaming about? Or maybe when you're laying in bed at night, where does your mind effortlessly go? I was at a birthday party a couple of weeks ago for one of our kids, and this guy I've known for a really long time, he talked about how every night when he lays in bed, he just thinks about, so not dreaming, but like daydreaming before he falls asleep, he thinks about winning the lottery and how he's going to spend the money every night. And so, so when you lay in bed at night, do you pray or think about heavenly things, or do you develop potential scenarios for career advancement, right? Or think about a bigger home or a relationship with a particular person? And so, again, one or two daydreams are not necessarily an indicator of idolatry, but like, what do you consistently think about to get joy and comfort from in the privacy of your heart? Think about that. Okay, so this week, maybe even journal about it, spend some time thinking about it, talk about that with your city group once you've had time to journal about it, and really think about, where does my mind continually and effortlessly go when nothing else is demanding my attention? Second, another way to discern your heart's true desire is your money. Jesus said, where your heart is, there your treasure will be as well. And so your money, flows effortlessly, your money flows most effortlessly toward your heart's greatest desire. So in fact, a mark of an idol is that you're always kind of having to stop yourself from spending more money on it. So my encouragement is, evaluate your past 60 or 90 days of spending. Maybe even print out the past 60 or 90 days from your account and just kind of categorize things. Comfort, I spent a lot more on comfort than I thought, or a lot more on this or that, and just kind of categorize it and let those numbers just kind of show you, put into practice on finding maybe a hidden idol. Third way that works well for us church people, evaluate, ask those close with you, how do I respond to unanswered prayers? How do I respond to frustrated hopes? If you ask God for something and he doesn't do it like you wanted, maybe you get sad and disappointed, but you move on pretty quickly in a day or two. Everybody gets sad and disappointed. So every time you get sad, it's not like there's this deep, dark idol in your heart. Everybody gets sad. We're humans. But when you pray or work for something and you don't get it and you respond with explosive anger or deep, long-lasting despair, you may have encountered an idol in your heart. Paul Tripp said, and I have a love-hate relationship with this quote, but he said, most people who are angry with God are angry with him for being God. They're not angry because he's failed to deliver what he promised. They're angry because he has failed to deliver what they craved, expected, or demanded. A final test for us, and we've kind of looked at this already because of the example of the Israelites, but look at your most uncontrollable emotions. What makes you leap with joy and what makes you wail in tears? Who can devastate you with a word, right? In our story today, after Joshua and Caleb, say everybody, hey, let's stop rebelling, people gathered big rocks to kill him with. Okay, so this sermon was not received very well. And in verse 14:11, God speaks again, and he says, how long will this people, look at this word, despise me? How long will they not believe me? In the Bible, when God asks a question, he's not launching an investigation, he's staging an intervention. Okay, Adam, hey Adam, where are you? Hey Cain, where's your brother? Hagar, where'd you come from and where are you going? Woman, where are your accusers? Peter, do you love me? Saul, why are you persecuting me? In Numbers 14:11, God asks, how long would this people despise me? How long would they not believe in me in spite of all the signs that I've done among them? God's people needed to walk through the wilderness before they could walk with God in the promised land. That's the summary of all of it. He had to do some heart work on them. For us, instead of looking for what God provides, look to him. It's a very nuanced difference in how to live your life and your relationship with God. Look to his heart instead of just his hand. Just like the rest of the Old Testament, all of this story points to Christ. Every single bit of it points to Jesus. Unlike Moses and the spies who left Egypt to go to the promised land, Jesus left the promised land to go to Egypt. He was sent into the desert for 40 days. And while there, he was tempted to covet, complain, control, but he never would. Instead, he would trust God perfectly. Emerging with an even better report than Joshua and Caleb. And like Joshua and Caleb, Jesus would also be rejected by his own people. And his people wouldn't just try to kill him, they would get the job done. They would kill him But where sin increased, grace increased all the more. And on the cross, Jesus would pray something even better than Moses. Jesus would pray, Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. Please don't treat them like their sins deserve. Why? So that we could be his chosen people. So that we could be with him forever in the ultimate land of promise.